Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Basic Income Show. I'm your host, Scott Santons, and my co hosts here are Conrad Shaw and Josh Worth.
Hello.
And let's get to talking about some basic income news, shall we?
We shall.
This intro music is AI generated. Love it or hate it, no one is compensated. One more artist wonders where their money will come from. One more example of the need for basic income.
That was a fun one too, right?
Yeah, I'm always
What
self-conscious
was the
of
prompt for that one.
Yeah. What was the prompt?
Like
It's always
Dua
just putting
Lipa
in
disco.
the lyrics. Yeah, and then I don't know, just like
You didn't pick a
fun.
genre and say,
I don't know the exact prompt I'm using. It's something like fun podcast intro, and then like a
Just-
few genre selections based on like what it's come up with for previous clips that we liked.
Nice.
I'm always self-conscious when it's got a good beat and I'm dancing along because I'm aware from doing this that there's like a lag of like a half a second. So it probably looks like I'm off the beat.
Like you have no rhythm.
Or maybe I am on the beat and it's making me look like, or maybe I am off the beat and it's making me look like I'm on the beat.
Luckily, it's not a dance podcast.
Well, here's a
All right, yeah. So let's get to the news.
Yeah, what's going on in the world? I don't follow the news. Tell
Yeah,
me.
I stopped watching anything.
I think that the thing I want to talk about first and foremost today is what's been going on in South Korea. A lot has happened in South Korea just in like the last couple days. Basically, the president of South Korea, which is, let's say, basically the Republican Party president there in South Korea, he enacted martial law just kind of out of nowhere. The Congress is controlled by basically like the Democratic Party there. They've been trying to reel in what he's been doing. They say he has authoritarian tendencies and stuff. He decided to declare martial law, and then one of the things they can do there, their Congress can basically nullify that. There's an attempt to block the members of their National Assembly from getting in and voting to prevent martial law, and they successfully did that. Now they're looking to impeach him. So just whole lots of drama
This feels
is
like
going on there.
This feels like maybe a glimpse at our future. The whole, and like it's just such a confusing for the public issue, I imagine, because one side says like, oh, he's an authoritarian, and he's like, well, yeah, martial law. That's a pretty authoritarian move, but also like it's hard to decide like, well, is it necessary if you're a fan or whatever? I could see that happening exactly like that here. 50% of the country being for martial law. It's hard to know what the hell is true. I wonder if they have a similar sort of way of getting their media and information.
Yeah. Like one thing, before I connect this to basic income, just to kind of get people up to date more, like here's something that was just posted an hour ago. The candlelit vigils and rallies were held across South Korea on Wednesday. A nation outraged and frustrated by the president's surprise declaration of martial law the night before. They called for his resignation. And this is where I want to connect it to basic income. There's a video of the leader of the, what is their like Democratic Party, scaling the wall to get in and vote to nullify, the martial law. And so he's been getting a lot more coverage.
Of the building to vote, they were like blocked out. They had to climb in, or
Yeah, like the president like did what he could to prevent enough people from getting in to vote against his martial law. And so the guy's name is Jae Myung Lee, and he's the leader of the opposition party there, and he barely lost the presidency in 2022. The current president who's doing all this stuff was elected in 2022, and his opponent, Lee, ran hard on universal basic income and lost by less than 1% of the vote there in South Korea. So it was just extremely close there in South Korea. Like those of us who were really into UBI were just really hoping that he could pull it off. If he had won, then it seems very likely that South Korea would have been the first country to adopt some kind of basic income, because he's basically kind of like their Andrew Yang in that, he was running on fully universal basic income. And he actually was even the former governor of one of the provinces there in South Korea, kind of like the governor of a state here in the US, Gyeonggi province. And he had actually introduced something popular there that was the youth dividend. It was years ago, even prior to the pandemic. He was elected in like 2018, and they provided youth basic income to almost 100,000 24-year-olds living in the province. So it was like a universal amount that was provided to every 24-year-old in that province every year since 2019. So I'll go to this. It gets over like a summary. This was published on basicincome.org, and it was an interview, translated interview from 2017. Like this interview was before he even was running for president. And I just wanted to cover this bit too, because it's not like he was just like running on basic income to win the presidency. He clearly strongly supports basic income. And like with Andrew Yang, he was, supported it before he decided to do this. And unlike Andrew Yang, he actually had local governing experience. Like this is a guy who climbed the ranks of his party through governing in South Korea. And let's see, besides running on a basic income, I also loved that his proposal for doing it was to actually use a land value tax and also a carbon tax. Not only is he running on not only was he running on UBI there in South Korea, but his taxation mechanisms are also ones that I support. It's not like he was running on UBI and then suggesting something that I think is like okay. He was basically running on exactly how I would like it to be done, like optimally. I would love to see a land value tax go along with UBI, and also, of course, carbon tax, as we've discussed on the show before.
How much was he proposing originally in his plan for a payment?
Did they do a DNC on him, and now they're in? Like, do we know what the politics was of him losing?
Well, he just barely lost. I don't know if you mean what the politics are. It was just like super close. And I mention this now too, just because he's like, he's getting visibility. He's still the leader of the opposition party there. And, he's getting, I think, good coverage from what's going on in South Korea because he's clearly fighting against what's going on. He's right up there. And of course, we're looking at a potential impeachment. And this is even like members of the president's own party are even considering this too. So, we could basically see what we didn't see when Trump attempted his self-coup, where like he might actually get removed from office for declaring martial law and basically try to, get rid of democracy in South Korea like this.
And does that mean that this other guy who ran on UBI would be the person put in, or would it be another person in the party that won, or like taking over like a vice president? Do we know?
I don't know who's the most likely to immediately take over. Like, I doubt that it's, Lee, because this is the opposition party. Like, it's going to be some member of the party in power, but clearly someone more interested in democracy, there. Someone who opposed what the current president is doing.
Even if it were Lee, he wouldn't have as much of a mandate to implement on.
Yeah. I wanted to make sure and talk about this because it's opening up what could happen again. Like there's going to be some punishment, like some major punishment during the next election for what's gone on. And that could just mean I don't know if Lee is going to run again, but it seems like this is an opportunity where like he could garner more support and really push against what happened, and the result of this could be in the next election that he could be elected if he runs again, and if he did, then most likely UBI would again be part of his platform for what he wants to do. So I don't know, what I'm seeing right now in South Korea just gives me hope that there could be more momentum going into the next election than I'd originally hoped. Like before, it was just kind of like your typical thing where, okay, someone lost, party takes over, and then they do whatever. And then during the next election, if people are happy or unhappy or whatever, then the election. But like here, like there's outrage about what has gone on. And so this really could mean a huge mandate for Lee if he runs again, or someone else who maybe still would approve of UBI too. I don't know. I
Man,
think it's really interesting.
that's exciting. Do you think that, in your opinion, does that put them in the new leader rankings? I think of like at the carnival, there's like the little horses that you have, and then like the spray gun, and like which country is going to have UBI first. And we've been having this debate for like 10 years. It's like suddenly it's Italy. No, now it's India. Now it's the UK. Do you think this puts South Korea right up at the front?
I think they're up there, and I think they've been up there because again they almost did it already. Like 2 years ago, it was just so ridiculously close to actually happening. And then there's also like there's a party there called the Basic Income Party in South Korea. Like that's how like big of a concept it is there and how popular it is. Like it's not like this is the only guy running on it. There's actually a good amount of support for it.
That's really cool. And I love that it looks like it's designed pretty ideally. Not like, one of the things I fear is if like a UBI in America were proposed in the current political landscape, it wouldn't really be a UBI. It would be somehow targeted. It would have questionable funding mechanisms. But yeah, to have it based on land value tax. Did you say it is like fully universal, or would it be some in some way means tested?
It would be fully universal. He believes in going universal and like starting on the low side.
Let's get him on the podcast. Give him the old basic income show bump with our 50
Have you ever been
viewers.
in touch with them, Scott?
I've actually met him before. We haven't had a conversation, but when I was at the Basic Income Conference in South Korea, he actually visited the Basic Income Conference, and it was a huge thing where there's like all kinds of press there, and he and like a bunch of others were there. This was like right at the beginning of the conference, and he gave like a quick speech about basic income in South Korea, and then there was like a big photo op, and they had up like a bunch of national press there, and then took like photos of all of us. And it's funny, like I actually was standing right next to him in those photos. It just happened to work out that way because like I went up to him after his speech just to chat with him and just like say hello and like thank him for running on UBI and stuff. And then like they did the photos. So I don't know. There's like a bunch of photos from that press conference with like me right next to him. I think that's kind of funny how that worked out.
In the edit
Does he
of
speak
this,
English?
you can.
Yeah, a little bit.
In the edit of this, you can pop up those photos. Huh?
Yeah, we're gonna want to see that.
I don't even have a photo of it. Like I just know that there were all those press there taking those photos.
I remember I was really jealous of that conference. Like I still haven't gotten to go to a BN conference because I haven't had indie film people. We don't have international travel money, and no one was inviting us. But that conference looked especially cool. I remember the picture. My favorite was of a guy sitting.
Guy standing, sitting.
I don't know if the people watching understand that joke, but to me, it's hilarious. There's a guy named Guy Standing, but he was clearly sitting.
So I'm just looking at the conversion here. It says wouldn't be difficult to increase the basic income from 30,000 won per month to 50,000 won per month or more. And this was actually a few years, actually more than a few years ago, because again, this is like the 2017 interview. So it's probably more than that now.
200,000 won annually, but that doesn't sound right. I think that might be a weird Google AI.
Yeah, I think that's old, because here too, this was years ago.
I
And
thought
it was
you scrolled by
300,000
something
won.
higher up in this article that had a number. It was like 1 million or something. I didn't know to convert.
Like I think that may be the more recent one. Okay, here we go. So this was before, I think right before the election, and they envisioned a payment of up to 5 million won a year. So do you want to convert
I've
that?
got my converter up. Yeah.
Okay, do 5 million won a year, divide that by 12, make it like a monthly. And that's not even, this won't even be adjusted for like purchasing power parity, but it'll
So
just give
I've
like a
got-
direct
So
conversion.
5 million is 3,500 a year.
Okay,
What is that a month?
So
that's like $300 a month.
300.
291. Which
Can you find a purchasing power parity converter and see what the difference is for that? I'll just read a little bit more of this while we wait. In the end of the vision holds, it is now the country will be providing around 10% of its gross domestic income to people's universal basic income. This is Kang, like advisor.
The only thing I know about the economic climate of South Korea, I learned from the movie Parasite, which seems to. Do you remember that movie? It's
a wild
it's pretty.
I did see that. Yeah, that's the monster movie.
So
No, it's not the monster movie. No.
A bit of a horror movie, but yeah.
Right, it's the one in
it's all
the
about
house,
the
the
sort
basement.
of economic disparity between
Right.
the sort of the haves and have-nots.
Yeah, that was a great like inequality movie.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's some more. All South Koreans would first be given a basic income of 1 million won a year. Young citizens age 29 or below will be given 1.2 million won more, and 1 million won will be additionally provided to those age 60 to 64. The lowest earning
what was the salary again in Seoul for a year? I'm not salary. What was the yearly basic income again? I found a converter. I have to pick a city in the U.S. So I'm on Austin right now.
Well, let's say start at 1 million won is what it seems like. And then down here, they think at least or up to 5 million won a year.
So 1 million
and
won
then 10% of GDP.
1 million won is worth like 1,100 or no, closer to 1,200 in Austin, Texas. And I'm assuming it's Texas. So it's like $1,200 per, which means $100 a month. So each million won is worth about $100 a month. So
is that purchasing power parity?
Won would be $500 a month.
Is that
Austin.
Purchasing power parity?
Yeah, this is purchasing power.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So then I guess when he says start small, then he's looking at a fully universal amount of say $100 per month, and then going up to $500 per month. But then
that's
the other one
big. I mean,
they want to get to is 10%
like
of GDP per capita.
We've seen the $50 a month studies that still have huge impact. So like even at the small level they're starting at and implementing it, like this is sort of like my ideal scenario, do it with a carbon tax, do it with land value tax, or whatever. Start small, but make it big enough, like $100 a month qualifies in my mind to be big enough to see major impacts. And if it's built and designed that way and everyone really is getting it universally, not kids, not seniors, everyone, not just kids, not just seniors, then I don't know how they'll ever get rid of it. That's sort of the scenario in my mind where it becomes like the seed for sort of like a viral growth of this idea. It's really a human rights idea that's how I envision it sort of spreading the globe, is it lands somewhere and it lands there right. So it'll never go from that place, and then it'll start showing the impact. It's kind of what we want to do with commingled too, is just have it land in some form right, so that like people can build off of it and copy it, or it can grow itself. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I wasn't aware there was such a movement for it in South Korea.
That guy looks
now
nice.
I've learned something.
I'm
Just
guessing
by
this
being
is
on
the
this
UBI
podcast.
guy. This is the guy we were talking about who wants to do the UBI.
Who what?
Not the guy we were talking about earlier who wants to do martial law. He doesn't look like a martial law fellow. He looks like a UBI fellow. You can kind of tell them after you've been in the movement long enough. It's like, nah. it's like a form of radar, UBI dar.
Here we go. This is what I wanted to show. Okay, so on Blue Sky, Lee Jae-myung, leader of South Korea's Democratic Party, live streamed himself scaling the walls of the National Assembly to bypass military barricades so he could vote to overturn the president's martial law. So
This
here's
is cool.
that.
I was curious how tricky the walls were to scale. That's not it. I was thinking like Iger sanction, cliffhanger. That was a quick little thing.
Yeah, it's not like a huge wall,
That's
but
not-
there was actually a large group of people actually helping members of their Congress over the wall. Dozens of people just helping people over in order to vote.
It ties in also to like a lot of the stuff you like to talk about, Scott, and and Karen Stenner's stuff about how authoritarianism comes from and is empowered by fear and insecurity. And so like these things are directly in opposition here, empowering the people versus empowering a single person with martial law over the people. It's a very stark juxtaposition. Like it's sort of lined up exactly, and it's almost too like good and evil in this situation. I'm sure I don't know nearly enough to speak on it very well, but from here, that's what it smells like.
I'm trying to find the next thing.
We have a question from the audience for after we get through the Korea part of the episode. That's sort of interesting that we haven't talked much about. So that can be on deck.
What's that?
There's an interesting question from Tiago in the audience for after we get through this news stuff on Korea.
Okay, well we're done on Korea. I was going to go to the next thing anyways. So yeah, what is that?
All right, so here's what Tiago says, and this is an interesting conversation for me because we came to this, Dea and I, my partner Dea and I, from the environmental movement. And this question comes up a lot when it comes to this idea of growth versus degrowth, consumerism, economic growth. So Tiago says, Americans and Canadians talk a lot about one of the effects of UBI would be more economic growth. What do you think about degrowth movement? A lot of scientists and academics say we need to stop this obsession. We live on a limited planet. We can't have eternal growth, especially in the global north. And with more automation, more resources, we are going to deplete. What do you think about this? I have a client meeting right now. Okay, he's going to listen back later. So, Tiago, I hear this a lot, and I think it's very nuanced too, and it is where we run into the most sort of hesitation from sort of the climate-focused and progressive side of things, which are a lot of friends of mine, and I think about this too. I'm very concerned with consumption and depletion of resources and pollution. For one thing, look at the example of like single-use plastics, right? You have people who consume a ton of it are generally people of lower income, lower security. Like if you've got a drawer full of the plastic forks and knives from McDonald's, it's because you can't invest in real silverware. If you've got cheap sweatshop labor jeans, it's because you couldn't invest in a good pair for $60. It's going to last a bunch of years. Then that's done ethically. So there's a lot of consumption choices that are empowered by economic security, and in general, it's not about just having more stuff. That's people really do, when given the ability, care about conscientious consumption. You can see that in the reality, or like the way the minimalism movement pans out. Minimalists go on their TikToks and Instagram channels and talk about how great it is to be minimalist. They're always wealthy. Like, it actually costs a lot to be minimalist because you have to have like really high end things, and you can pick the perfect investments for your furniture or whatever. This is the sort of thing that it would like, on one side, that sort of consumption could be done a lot more conscientiously. Now, there is maybe I would imagine an upswell of consumption in the people who just don't have enough stuff. Like, people who don't have enough to survive, get by, like are just under resourced. And that there's this sort of daunting ethical question there. It's like, the implication of saying that's bad for those people to get enough for their basic needs is saying we need to solve the climate problem by perpetuating severe poverty, or like the global south, like the whole argument that like we can't allow them to catch up and have a middle class lifestyle because that's not sustainable. That begs a much deeper question of like, then why is it sustainable for us, and like, what does an actual sustainable future look like? I do think a lot more people are ready to come to that conversation with a clear head and less of like a fuck you, I just got to get by in the world that is mindset when we have economic security. So in terms of, I think these questions are going to be very challenging questions in terms of growth and in terms of sustainability, but will be better suited in my mind to face them when people aren't, in scarcity mode up against the wall, and they're able to like think about what they care about and what they believe in rather than how to survive.
Yeah. There's definitely a whole like conversation to have about this, because there's multiple points that I would like to make in like support of what you were saying. Yeah, there's definitely scarcity thinking driving a lot of this, and what it makes me think of, one of the experimental results we've talked about before is how a basic income like program in Indonesia resulted in like 30% less deforestation, and then in Namibia there was 95% less animal poaching, illegal hunting of animals. And so there's like a certain amount of survival kind of work that people are doing that is either damaging to the environment, damaging to society, and if they have the ability because their needs are met to not do that stuff, then they will. And so it's not when people say people might work less, it's like, well, those are kind of examples of work that people should do less of, and they should be able to do something else. And then David Graeber's bullshit jobs, I think, is an important part of this conversation too, because just imagine how many jobs are done that's like very highly resource intensive. Like, let's say people commute hours a day or something to go to and from their jobs in some office, and let's say that job is just like trying to market completely pointless goods, or that are also resource intensive and pointless. Like, let's say they're made out of plastic and they do nothing. It's like, this is a ridiculous job that people don't need those products, but they're being marketed anyways, and they're like wasting time and resources and the electricity and everything and of those businesses running. So just, I want people who care about the environment to think about that kind of bullshit jobs kind of side of things, where like, let's actually reduce the amount of just crap work being done that people could actually choose against doing.
And
instead
I
of doing
think
like
a result
valuable work.
of reducing the amount of crap work is reducing the amount of crap, right? Like, so
Right.
like, just by, I think there's this kind of inherent feeling that we need to just be making more and more stuff. Like, that's how we're all going to survive, right? And more stuff means more and more jobs, right? But if the emphasis is taken off of the need for jobs being our means of survival, then I kind of see it as being that's going to help to reduce the amount of just kind of wasteful production that's damaging the planet.
There was something that I just thought was kind of endemic of this, like, just mass wastefulness recently, which was, this was in the news where like some some AI driven company is like, it's like a new publishing house for books. And like their whole goal is to like, put out just thousands of books using AI, these large language models to write these books. And they're just, garbage books. And you're putting all this energy in, all this electricity is running the LLMs to create this garbage that no one is going to read. And people are doing this because they just need the income. So they're hoping that they can get some passive income from publishing some book and getting people to fall for this book as being a book worth reading when it's just been LLM written garbage.
Yeah. There's
this would not exist. Like that, people would not be doing that. This company wouldn't exist. I think that's a great example of we can actually reduce the electricity use in, like, there's just so much that stuff that people are doing only because they need that income.
I actually have a lot more that I've written down because I actually sometimes go to things and present just on this issue of like UBI and climate. But yeah, that's one is the just all of the bullshit that we create for the sake of survival that like people know has no actual meaning. And then there's the commute that there's a like part of the fight for remote work versus commutes and stuff is thumbed on the scale is thumbed towards the employers in a lot of cases because employees are the ones in the desperate situation more often that need the job. So they'll do the thing, even if it's like, why the hell am I driving an extra half an hour twice a day for this thing when I don't really need to be there? And so they don't have the leverage to say no or do another job or start another thing. Another thing, let's see, I'm going to just run down a little list here. One is democratic engagement and activism, like how many more people show up to actually fight for the causes of environmentalism and sustainability if they're like free to show up. I think of, Standing Rock because we had some friends involved in that or covering it. And like a lot of people went to that because it was sexy. It was sort of like overflowing and it got a bunch of press. But what about all the other pipeline protests that were underrepresented? How many people in activist movements burn out? That's a big problem is people are basically sacrificing their time for these things because they're not, it's not gainful employment. It's like voluntarily losing economic security to do something you care about. If we take away that paradigm and allow people to still be okay, a lot more people show up for that and just for democratic engagement in general. I'll take a pause because I've got like 4 more things, but I don't want to just run down.
Okay. So another thing I want to add is, and we've covered this with like talking about carbon tax and dividend and stuff. So this is the ability that UBI opens up for taxes on stuff that we want less of. So, the obvious is a carbon tax, but we can do taxes on resources so that, first of all, too, like you tax lithium or something. And yeah, that would make electric cars more expensive a little bit, but also where these resources are coming from, those have value and people should benefit from that instead of just the corporations coming in and digging this stuff out of the ground. And it also encourage more recycling. So, if it's a little bit more expensive to virgin lithium or whatever, then it makes more sense to recycle the lithium. And so then you've got this encouraging of renewability. And then the other thing is taxes, something like a value-added tax. So this is any kind of consumption tax. So it could be a transaction tax or value-added tax, something like that. The way that UBI and this tax interacts, let's look at Yang's freedom dividend as an example. So that was a $12,000 a year UBI model with a 10% VAT. So then you've got your crossover point at $120,000 of consumption. This is assuming 100% pass through. So again, it's like for simplification, but just kind of to get an idea of this. Basically, those earning and spending under $120,000 a year, they're purchasing for basic goods and services, like the stuff that we need, is subsidized. So we don't want people to, suffer. We want people to actually have enough to signal for the supply to meet their basic needs. And so we want to subsidize that stuff. And then if you're earning and spending over $120,000 a year, then there's pressure against that spending. So that way there's a little bit less spending for like your luxury goods and stuff, because that has an added price. And so we're actually kind of discouraging spending beyond that point, and we're encouraging spending below that point. And I think if those who care about degrowth like understand that that's the interaction between taxes and UBI, then they can see that UBI is actually something that encourages the spending that we need and discourages the spending that we don't need, that is just like extra. We can have less of that.
I would go even further and say, like with something like a carbon tax or other Pekovian taxes, like taxes against negative externalities and things, they need a UBI as the mechanism for what you do with the funding. Like they did it, a carbon tax in France some years back, and the justified complaint was that you're putting climate change on the backs of the poor, because you don't tax. The tax doesn't just like end at the companies who are extracting the oil or creating the packaging or whatever. It gets passed on to the consumer always. So you need to account for that and say, okay, we take that revenue, give it back to the public, so that the people who are consuming under a certain level, generally the lower income people who have smaller houses, less flights, buy less stuff, end up getting more in UBI than they spend in their extra costs of living. So it ends up being a way to not only support people of lower income, but to make any sort of like carbon tax or a thing like that truly focus its penalty on the higher consumption and not punish the poor. Like, so in France, when they did this without having there be a UBI dividend, they had, tens of thousands of people wearing yellow vests in the street, and it wasn't a good scene. And they earned it. Like they fumbled it. If they hadn't done that, it could have been sustainable. So yeah, it's actually necessary to have a UBI in place to pass aggressive, like, conservation and sustainability policy in some cases.
Yeah, reminds me too of like the soda tax that like failed utterly. I think it was in New York too, where they soda leads to more diabetes and all the problems from sugar and stuff, so let's tax it. And that's the thing where like, yeah, great, I can see your point, but when you do that, then you're going to be hurting those with lower incomes, and that just raises the cost of living for them. Yes, you're discouraging sugar, but that is something that's really unpopular. It's not necessarily true that that it would make it like politically popular in order to do like a soda tax and a rebate or something, until people understand the UBI mechanism. In like a UBI world where we have a UBI and we're understanding the way that taxes interact with it to like discourage stuff we don't like, then we can say, oh, yeah, let's add a soda tax to it, and let's add some other tax that's green in some way. There are taxes that can actually work great.
Right. And the growth and degrowth, just framings in general, a little, they're not nuanced enough to really capture that much, because when you just say growth, economic growth, a lot of times, like I think Tiago here was, imagine more stuff, more extraction, more creation of and using of raw materials. So there is also like the ability to grow in terms of services, experiences, leisure. Like there's ways to grow economically without creating more things. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. And degrowth isn't always good if it's like reducing human prosperity, and especially if it's unnecessary. It's like shooting ourselves in the foot with austerity when it doesn't actually like potentially, make us more sustainable environmentally. So there's a much more complicated route to take to get towards.
I would say there's like good growth and bad growth.
Yeah, that's a nicer, smarter way to say it. Yeah, I got one more thing too. It's like, go ahead, you go first.
Well, no, I was just looking at in the comments, somebody was mentioning that it's also kind of like reducing the military-industrial complex would end up meaning people don't have jobs also. Like, and most people are, you could look at that and say, reducing the military-industrial complex is like every progressive answer to how we, spend our taxes better. And so, but then, there's still people that will lose jobs. So but just in a bigger question, there's this picture that you have of the way you guys talk about UBI is like, you're not just talking about the handing out of money, of free money, right? Like, it's, the picture is this sort of cyclical movement of the taxes into being turned back into the UBI for people, right? Like, and so like, there's, I don't know, there's something in the way that we frame our thinking that we're just calling it universal basic income means you're just focusing on the handing out of the money part, right? And then just focusing on the taxing part means you're just focusing on the economic sort of impact of it, or the economic sort of downsizing, right? And so like,
I would say like inflation management whole, and like behavior change.
Yeah. Like, there's all those questions that keep coming up, but like, seeing that, picturing it more as like this cycle of movement of money it's very helpful to me, at least. So I don't know if there's some other way we can start communicating about it that can kind of emphasize that like movement of just money from the money going in, money coming back, and when the money comes back, the place that it comes back is in your pocket, right? And now you have more money to spend on the thing that you just raised the taxes on, right? So
yeah, there's just it's just a endless conversation of like, what do we call this thing? Like UBI makes people think of this, negative income tax makes people think of that, dividend makes people think of this, and they all have like valid points. It just does so many things. Like, it fixes the market so it can be a more free market. And in any market, if you have all the sides of a negotiation have, not being desperate, like the labor market or the consumption market, if you don't have a monopoly on one side of any negotiation, which is what happens more when you sort of guarantee a certain amount of power and safety and agency to everyone in the discussion, that means everyone can walk away from any sort of thing. That is actually a free market mechanism that makes the market actually have a chance at being more free and less coercive. And there's like, just finding the right term for it is an endless ping pong battle, where it's like, yeah, we got to get people to just see it and feel it and like understand it intuitively, because it does touch everything, and there are a million different ways to frame it and look at it.
I want to respond to the military industrial complex question or comment too. I think it's interesting to think, and this is so, the proper way of looking at the economy, it's not that taxes make spending possible. It's that, the government spends money to existence, and then taxes basically erase the money. So it's a matter of managing the money supply. And then so when it comes to like, military jobs, like we're spending, $1 trillion a year on this stuff. And so basically imagine that money is entering the economy in exchange for people working in, this military stuff. So this is soldiers, but it's also all the defense contractors. It's like people building missiles and tanks and planes and, everything around that, like everything that a federal check goes to that's also where money enters the economy. It's brand new money is entering when someone who makes missiles for a living, they get their paycheck and then they spend it at their local grocery stores. They spend it on rent and stuff. That is new money to the economy. And then that money works its way up and up and up and up and up and up, and that's just the direction that money flows, is into the hands of the rich, which is why it's so important to also tax the rich, because then, that's how you actually prevent way too much inequality happening. So it's not that like you're taxing it at the top and then moving it to the bottom. It's that you're like evaporating it at the top so that you can create more at the bottom. And that's just all federal spending is that way. So it's just, I don't know. It's interesting, I think, to think of this like military spending, all this defense spending. It's a lot of money, but it's like in all these, this is the people spending this money. It's like a jobs program. It's like as close as we have gotten to like a federal jobs guarantee, like working for some way related to the defense sector. And that's why you've got all these states, the governor of these states do not want to lose any of these jobs because that's what's feeding the local economy. Like that's where this money is going, and then it's worked its way up. So if we actually have a UBI, then that does alter this, and it enables us to actually, that's the new origin of money is in everyone's pockets. They're all spending some degree in their local economies, and then that enables us to actually get rid of some of these jobs that maybe the military is too large. Let's actually shrink some down here and there. Let's focus on what we should actually be focusing on. Yeah, and we can't do that.
Also, something happens in that military economy is that like because you always hear about like the stories of like one little bolt for a jet fighter costs like $1,000, right? Like that it takes on its own sort of form of inflation that it's like, so where is that money going now? Like nobody's complaining about the inflation happening in that world, right? Like it's because it's sort of the self-contained economy that like you're just
and it's full of these like bullshit jobs too.
Well, and it doesn't have a competitive market mechanism. Like that was one of the things that like the SpaceX, like for all my complaints of Elon, I used to work in government contracting. I used to work at Lockheed, and I just saw how damn wasteful it was, how hard it was to fire people, how ridiculous the contracts are, where the agreement is that essentially we'll just keep paying you forever until you're done. There's no like there's not much of a competitive process to make sure that things are done smartly and costs are in order. And my understanding is that SpaceX came along and sort of upended that whole system and said, no, we're gonna aggressively have a competitive offer that ties us to a bid, and we're going to make it obvious that this is the way to do it. And that's a pretty radical approach that they took that should be brought to markets like healthcare and like government and defense and stuff like that, because there really is not much oversight when the Pentagon can like lose hundreds of billions of dollars a year and there's no accountability. It's like, yeah, that's clearly a problem. And at the same time, the Elon, Vivek, all the Department of Doge or whatever, government efficiency stuff, they'll run into a similar problem with like, they want to cut back on the government, like Twitter or whatever is the rhetoric coming out, like cut all these unnecessary workers. But in a paradigm where you have like people need their job to live, you're basically cutting people off from their access to basic needs. And if you don't have something like a UBI as like a transition tool and a fallback for people like in between stuff, then you're in trouble. Like, so they're going to make a lot of people very mad, by doing that, or very hurt by doing that.
Yeah. Why isn't, say, Elon Musk, who, supposedly supports UBI, why isn't he shouting from the rooftops, like, let's actually use UBI as a way to actually simplify and reduce, government, make it more efficient, and that again just feeds into, does he actually support UBI if he's like in this position where you're talking about greater government efficiency and he's not actually talking about UBI as a way of enabling that? Instead, again, he only talks about it as something like a post AGI future.
Yeah. I mean, we all want to cut the bloat. Like everybody wants to cut the bloat and the bureaucracy. Well, almost everybody.
Right.
But you also the reason it sticks around for a lot of people is like, well, we don't want to, because the bloat is actually human beings with children and needs and stuff, and we need to somehow divorce those jobs from people's needs, or vice versa, so that we are allowed to make these decisions. I remember that one of the things at Lockheed that always pissed me off is there was a lot of people there that weren't actually clocked in or checked, or they were clocked in, they weren't checked in, and they were just coasting for like years on end. And they charged $150 or $200 an hour for my work, and I was busting my ass, new kid, and paid me $30 an hour, and all that overhead goes towards like the reason it's so hard to fire people and keep a lean workforce is because we punt the responsibility of taking care of our people onto businesses. We say, well, businesses are responsible for healthcare. Businesses are responsible for feeding your kids. And if you're out on the street, it's because some corporation whose job really is to make money, it's like they let you down. That is the biggest punt of all time. The responsibility for the safety and security of our people should be on our government as its first and foremost obligation. It shouldn't be punted onto businesses. And in turn, if we take care of that to the government, the businesses can run much more efficiently and focus on what their purpose is, which is to provide a service or a good, make money, compete in the market. I think we can regulate a lot less in certain ways if we regulate correctly and protect our citizens in others.
Yeah.
I got one more thing on the climate thing too. This is a big one.
Okay, back to the climate thing. All right.
So, Dea, my partner, has done a lot of climate films. And one of the things I've learned, I've sort of absorbed over the time or been hit in the face with a lot during the research is all of these extractive industries, like a lot of climate issues, the personal responsibility stuff is a narrative that we just need to recycle more is a narrative pushed by fossil fuel industry and packaging companies like Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, Exxon. All that stuff is the same as Exxon saying, well, let's just change the term to global warming and it's natural. These are all narratives to allow them to keep doing business as usual and start blaming each other. And well, if we all just put more stuff in that blue bin, then the problem would go away. But it's just a fucking lie. It's a lie that gives us a less daunting thing is well, if I just do my part and then if everyone else did, but it's not true. It's it was something like 14% of things get recycled that go to the blue bin, and 2% of things actually get recycled in an effective way where they're not downcycled. And downcycled is so 12 of that 14 is downcycled, which means it's a water bottle now. Next would be a plastic bag. And then the next step is the landfill. There's 2% of things that you recycle can go from being a water bottle to being a water bottle to being a water bottle and be used multiple times. And so part of it is this industry-wide narrative. And these industries are entirely propped up upon economic insecurity of populations. From the plastic and recycling myth is only possible because there are countries in the global south that will take our trash and we'll blame them for not being able to handle our billions of tons of trash. And the only reason they're taking our trash is because there's some sort of marketable value. And the only reason there's some sort of marketable value is because they have a population of people so desperately poor that they'll sit stooped over piles of trash and lose a decade off of their life trying to find this bottle has a 2-cent value. I'm going to collect that one. I'm not. They're sifting through trash because they're that poor. If we didn't have these populations to punt that responsibility onto, the narrative of recycling, the myth of recycling wouldn't fly. Similarly, when big fuel refineries like natural gas refineries and things come into town, use eminent domain for pipeline or build factories down the street from neighborhoods, these neighborhoods are disempowered to fight against those things, even though the kids in those neighborhoods are losing a decade off their lives, even though they're getting all these diseases. A lot of it is about power dynamics. And lastly, you've got whole populations where we have slightly nicer plastic products for our shampoo bottles and things in the US that have little mechanisms built in, or in the Western countries that are an extra 10 cents went towards recollection and repurposing of this bottle. And it's been designed so that it can be recycled. But in a lot of places around the world, there's these sort of single-use plastic sachets that they look like sort of little individual condom wrappers on a giant wheel, that they're just flooding the markets of these people that don't have access to other things, that don't have enough money. So they're buying a helping of shampoo at a time wrapped in multi-laminate plastic. And all of this is based on the economics of the thing. It goes back to being able to make conscientious consumption, you have to have the money to do that, to make those choices. So if we had like a vast mitigation of economic insecurity around the country and around the world, a lot of this bullshit by the biggest perpetrators of climate change and extraction just wouldn't fly anymore.
Yeah, I mean, clearly this is like a whole episode or something we could do on degrowth and stuff, but I feel that we covered this pretty well.
I had a lot to say on
It
that.
was a good question.
Thank you, Tiago.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on, the next thing I wanted to make sure and cover, because this was another like round of studies were just published from Sam Altman's basic income pilot. And so then you got another round of like a couple other articles and stuff about this. So I'll just cover this is Business Insider's article. Headline: New findings from Sam Altman's basic income study challenges one of the main arguments against the idea. The subheadlines: Sam Altman's basic income study showed recipients valued work more after getting monthly payments. The finding challenges arguments against such programs that say a basic income discourages work. We've already talked this before. They got $1,000 a month for 3 years. This was 1,000 people across 2 states. There was 2,000 people in the control group.
I've been waiting for these next rounds of data to come out. Like, a lot of people didn't understand that this was just an initial thing
Right.
of data before, and there was a lot more to come.
Open Research Director Elizabeth Rhodes told Business Insider that the study participants showed a greater sense of the intrinsic value of work. She said researchers saw a strong belief among participants that work should be required to receive government support through programs like Medicaid or hypothetical future universal basic income. The study did show a slight increase in unemployment among recipients, but Rhodes said the overall attitudes toward working remained the same. So remember, the slight increase in unemployment was only in specific groups. It wasn't significant for those in the other groups. So again, there was no decrease in employment for those without kids and for those over age 30. And the decrease was only in, as usual, for specific groups like new parents and students and stuff. But yeah, it's interesting that more about this intrinsic value of work. It's interesting that it's not like a change in the value of work. If anything, they value work more. And as reflected, people are more likely to be searching for a job. They're more likely to have applied for jobs. So yeah, it's weird to think that maybe, it's hard to say this is a charity program. It wasn't a government program, which applies to another finding that we'll discuss right after this. But like that could be. It's an interesting impact potentially where if, let's say, people start getting universal basic income and they start valuing work more, and then they like start insisting that there's a work requirement on the thing that they're receiving that enables them to work. So like, I don't know, like that could be unfortunate if the impact of universal basic income is that recipients start worrying about how other people are using it and start like insisting on conditions and therefore ruining it, even though the benefits would be from the fact that it's actually universal non-conditional.
Yeah, it seems like there's something in there that's kind of like people are not going to change much. Like it's sort of showing that it's not really changing their political beliefs. It's not really changing the outlook that they had before or after, or before the study began, right? So yeah, I guess it'd be worth taking a deeper dive into it. But yeah, it's kind of a weird little thing that like if there was some universality to it, right? Then if it becomes like this culturally accepted thing, right? Then it really has no bearing one way or the other on how people think or act, right? Everybody would be getting this amount of money. And so the climate of the culture just includes this money, right? Like the impact is nothing except that people have more money, right? Like it is in terms of like attitudes about the world. I don't know.
I actually disagree pretty strongly. I think when you change the value of work from something extrinsic, like you need to survive, to something intrinsic, like this is demonstrating, I think all of a sudden our culture can be a lot less pragmatic, utilitarian, like I'm doing this, I need to survive. It's not my fault, it's just my job. And people can now value work and devalue bullshit work at the same time, like value meaningful work. And kind of what this does.
I totally see that's it would be sort of the end result is that we have this sort of change in attitude about work, but in a world where the cultural attitude is sort of spelled out in this way without a universal basic income, where it's like the UBI is this kind of like freak anomaly, right? That you're like, yeah, thanks for this money, but I'm not going to like change who I am because of it, right? Like the attitude would people react to the culture, right? They're not reacting to money.
I think what we'll see is maybe people stopping changing who they are so much. Like you have to change who you are to engage in the world as it is.
Yeah, right.
Like you have to turn off your ideals and ethics in a lot of cases. And I think when you have that, I think we can actually culturally move a lot more back toward like the rhetoric of like the JFK, ask not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country. Like that sort of accountability and obligation and soaring patriotism rhetoric can exist if your country's taking care of you and if you are freed up to do those things and survive.
Oh, I just want to add that. So one of the implications from this, so when it comes to like the work stuff, it could just be like the result of this being like a charitable experiment where people felt that they like, I'm getting this money, and then so I feel, this way about this work, and I don't know about what other people feel, but I want to show you, the researchers, that like I'm not lazy like those other people are. And so like a study like this may not necessarily get at the way that people would feel with an actual UBI, where there's some kind of incentive in place for people to feel that they need to project something to the researchers that isn't necessarily true with a full UBI. And so like another aspect of this wasn't only like this feeling about work that was from the newest results, but it was also about voter participation. And so here I'll read the abstract from this, because again, it ties right into this like difference between an experiment like this and full UBI. Here's the abstract. We study the causal effects of income on political attitudes and behavior with a field experiment. In the experiment, a nonprofit gifted 1,000 low-income Americans $1,000 per month for 3 years tax-free, and 2,000 control participants $50 monthly. Contrary to resource models of participation, we find no effects on political participation or engagement, and rule out effects equivalent to the observational association between turnout and income. Political preferences largely do not change, with the estimates again distinguishable from the observational relationship that economic conservatism increases with income. Dispositions such as trust in government, polarization, and support for democracy also do not change. We do find effects consistent with mood misattribution. Affect towards one's own racial group, other racial groups, and some politicians slightly improves. There's also some evidence that treated participants saw work as more important for individual society or even as a requirement for accessing government programs. Qualitative evidence illuminates potential mechanisms. Our findings contrast with findings from other economic shocks, such as government-sponsored or taxable transfers, thereby helping clarify the mechanisms likely responsible for their effects and underscore the durability of political predispositions. So one of the implications of this, and like I've seen people tweeting about this and posting about it, saying like, oh, this is another like failure of basic income, where it didn't result in people voting more. And then so those of us, like I've been speaking about how it's likely to increase voter participation. So this is potentially, like a black mark against that kind of claim. But I think it is important to realize that this was a charitable thing. And we've seen, and we'll follow this up with this next with the other studies, but there's definitely a difference between the government trusting you and saying, and politicians trusting you and saying, we're not going to put conditions on this. We're going to give you cash that you can spend on anything. We trust you. And those implications on political attitudes and voting behaviors versus like a nonprofit for some, charity-based experiment doing that. Like those are different things. And I think that's the good understanding where it's interesting to me that they found this, but it doesn't mean that UBI won't have this. It means that it's likely not going to be the result of a nonprofit based experiment versus like a public program.
Yeah, it's a result of a randomized trial too. I think it's fascinating what it raises, and the open research team tried to be extremely clinical in the way they handled everything, but acknowledging that this is clearly not a universalist thing. This is 1,000 people that were selected randomly to some degree out of population and disconnected from each other. And I think what happens when you do something, build something universal, and make it accessible to everybody, is you inevitably create a culture. It's now you're no longer just like responsible to like reporting how you feel to like some people doing research on you. You're responsible to and accountable to everyone around you because everyone knows you're getting it and they're getting it. And there's like this cultural like, well, what are you doing with yours? Like, I think you'll have this desire to prove that you're earning it to everyone who knows about it, right? We saw that too in Bootstraps. Like a lot of people, they want to show like, yeah, like I deserve this one. It was funny to me that the people who still maintained the most hesitance about like a federal level policy were for reasons that were like, maybe we shouldn't give it to people who are in drug addiction or things like that. Like what certain sort of guardrails were the exact people we chose because they were in those populations, that they were the ones that people would have issues with giving money with no strings. And, in their cases, they did incredibly well. And like, I'm not saying that there aren't a lot of people who would fail and find way or not use the money ideally. It's just very interesting that like in this situation where you find yourself like a lone individual singled out for this thing that kind of feels like winning a lottery of a sort, where you're being studied and everything, it's very different than projecting an imagination of what does this feel like when everyone around you is getting it forever and you all know you're all getting it. Like I think a culture arises out of universality that cannot be measured in these even though there was like a little bit of it in the Finland trial, I think, like more trust in government and stuff, but it can't really be measured until you do something fully universal. So
yeah, it's a macro. I mean, this is happening everywhere. It's a macroeconomic policy that's being tested in these microeconomic environments, right? So you can't.
It's not only macro, micro. It's public, private too. So it's both of those interacting.
Yeah, and that's a lot of like this is a lot of the impetus for commingle is like let's make it macro and let's make it basically not some entity from above is testing us to see how we do. It's like we are all doing this for each other, which is what the government should be.
Yeah, that's one thing that Coleman could look at, and maybe it'll find that there are actually voter participation kind of changes when something is sufficiently universal versus like a very small kind of pilot. We'll see.
Right.
But
there's voting within the American political context, but then there's also the sorts of voting and things we want to set up for commingle, where it's like, I'd be interested to see if when we start having those things, does someone stay disengaged with like politics in America, but get really engaged in the politics of like, what are you voting for within the commingle ecosystem because you feel like you're part of a community, you feel plugged in. There's a lot there.
Right. It's whatever community that you're in. And so clearly if you're in like this Sam Altman pilot, you're not in a community. And so why would you feel that there's any kind of voter implications if you're not part of that community? And especially if it's disconnected from the public participation part of it. So that's interesting to think about.
It's sort of naive too to assume that people will get like democratically engaged because of dollars. Like maybe some people
Well,
like their bandwidth is tapped enough that they just couldn't justify going out and voting in the local election. But for a lot of it is like it's not just dollars, it's like having a voice, being part of something.
well, so along that, like I want to get into three other papers. Like this is other evidence about this particular question, and then if we put all this together, I think it actually points out the accurate picture that wouldn't be obtained from just like reading the one study that Open Research just came out. So like again, it's always good to get the whole context from other research. So there was a study about this on the Alaska dividend, and here's what that found. So here's the abstract of this paper. Does the universal basic income affect voter turnout? This article argues that the introduction of an unconditional cash payment where citizens receive money independent of employment status, age, or indigence can have a turnout enhancing effect. I evaluate the argument using the introduction of a permanent fund dividend in Alaska. Differences estimates covering November general elections from 1978 to 2000 provide compelling evidence that the Alaskan UBI has a significant positive effect on turnout. The results further suggest the turnout increase was not a one-off effect, but persists over a period of almost 20 years. Thus, a UBI has the potential to positively affect turnout among an entire electorate, adding to the discussion around potential welfare reforms in Western democracies. So,
When was
again,
it
this
implemented,
is
the
this was
Alaska
a
dividend?
public program that has existed since 1982, and this has found an impact on voter turnout. So, again, like looking at this and looking at the open research pilot, I think the reason this found something that the other one didn't is because this is a government program. This is a state of Alaska program
It's totally
versus a
universal, like, which
charity.
is really
Yeah, and fully
important.
universal. So the next thing I wanted to cover too was evidence from Finland, and we have talked about this one before. And again, this found something. So here's the abstract from this paper. In many democracies, unemployed and low income citizens are less willing to vote. Can social policies weaken the link between income and turnout? We study policy feedback leveraging a unique experiment in Finland, which randomly assigned a sizable group of unemployed to receiving an unconditional basic income for 2 years. Combining individual level registry and survey data, we showed that the intervention has large positive effects on voter turnout. Unconditional basic income increases turnout in municipal elections by about 3 percentage points on average. An effect is concentrated among marginal voters, which see an increase of 6 to 8 percentage points, and persists in national elections after the end of the experiment. Exploring possible mechanisms, our analysis highlights the role of the interpretive effects that follow from unconditionality in the bureaucratic process, including higher levels of political trust and efficacy. We discussed implications for theories of voter turnout and policy feedback and the design of BI policies. So again, this was an experiment, only lasted 2 years, but this was a government experiment. And so this was the government of Finland trusting the recipients, showing increased trust in the recipients. And so again, it makes sense and supports the hypothesis that it's the matter of a public basic income versus a private experiment that shows
Like,
this
who's
kind
running
of voter turnout effects.
I bet if OpenAI like held little votes and polls and things with their recipients, they would get a lot of turnout. They're the ones running the basic income pilot. Like that's where they're gonna feel the extra, trust and accountability.
And then here's the third piece of this puzzle too. And this one looked at the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians dividend in North Carolina. And again, that's a long-term one. So that's like a natural experiment of UBI that's been going on since the mid 90s. And here's the abstract from that study. Despite clear evidence of an income gradient in political participation, research has not been able to isolate the effects of income on voting from other household characteristics. We investigate how exogenous unconditional cash transfers affected voting in U.S. elections across 2 generations from the same household. The results confirm that there was a strong intergenerational correlation in voting across parents and their children. We also show, consistent with theory, that household receipt of unconditional cash transfers has heterogeneous effects on the civic participation of children coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds. It increases children's voting propensity in adulthood among those raised in initially poorer families. However, income transfers have no effect on parents regardless of initial income levels. These results suggest that family circumstance during childhood, income in particular, plays a role in influencing levels of political participation in the United States. Further, in the absence of outside shocks, income differences are transmitted across generations and likely contribute in the intergenerational transmission of social and political inequality. So in this one, again, this is not a government basic income. This is the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians actually distributing money from their share of the profits from casinos to members of the tribe. And so, again, this kind of fits into the theory that it's public versus private. So this is a private one, and there's no impact found on adults. But what's interesting is that even though it's private, it actually does carry on to the children. So this is the children in this example actually grew up to be adults who vote in greater numbers. So I look at that and think, well, maybe an impact of a permanent UBI done by the government would be an increase for adults, and then also a larger increase for kids beyond the impact on adults.
I think, yeah, the kids part is really interesting. It's just the effect of income security into just having bandwidth access to getting engaged and being empowered. I would say this one needs a bit of a caveat that this is a government-run UBI. It's just not the U.S. government. It's a tribal government. And I'd be interested in understanding. I mean, they have their own sovereignty, and so it's important to acknowledge. And I'd be interested.
You'd have to look at voting, within that.
Yeah, like what's their engagement in tribal politics? Like, I don't know how the tribal politics works for the Eastern Cherokee, but like I would imagine it changed things. Like once they started giving out these dividends to everyone in the tribe, did they get more involved in their local political stuff?
Yeah, this one is just voting in U.S. elections.
Right.
So it's kind of like we're voting in elections that are kind of a little bit related to what our government is doing for us too.
Yeah. But a lot of tribal people don't fully acknowledge government control. A lot of people completely don't.
Right.
Like a lot of people that are on reservations describe their living situation as a permanent prisoner of war camp. So like it's sort of a disconnect to like measure their voting for the U.S. president when they don't even believe in the idea inherently that a U.S. president should have authority over them.
So I wanted to get to there's a couple other news pieces I wanted to get to, and we got about 20 minutes left. So the thing I wanted to make sure to get to next is this is just happening recently. Food banks across Canada are begging to be put out of business. Campaign asks Canadians to top up their donations by calling for basic income. This is the Put Food Banks Out of Business movement. I'll just read the section right here. First Food Food First NL is one of several food charities across Canada who've signed on to a campaign called Put Food Banks Out of Business. Launched by the Toronto Vegetarian Food Bank, it calls on Canadians donating to food banks this holiday season to also reach out to their local members of parliament to advocate for the implementation of basic income to keep people above the poverty line. Quote, I think one of the most important gifts we can give alongside cash is the gift of our voice, Smee said. They're making the call on Giving Tuesday, when charities around the world campaign for donations ahead of the holidays, sometimes with matching funds from companies. But in general, this is something that bothers me. It's actually even kind of one of the founding reasons of the Income to Support All Foundation is that, first of all, a lot of these nonprofits should see a basic income as being something that accomplishes their mission. So if you're a food bank, if you're really trying to feed people, that is your purpose, is that people eat and you get rid of hunger, then you actually should support a basic income because that would actually achieve your goal. And so it's good to see that these charities are saying, we actually should be out of business. Like, we shouldn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a real honest charity, is saying that our organization should not exist. We're meeting the demand for something that should not be a demand. There should be no hunger, in Canada. It's a rich, wealthy nation, and so there's no reason for there to be this hunger, especially this rampant hunger and rising hunger. In which case, yes, make sure that not only do you donate, but you also have an interest in solving the problem, which basic income is the solution.
Yeah, I have
Little
been
side
seeing a
note
lot.
about commingle is that it's sort of the same way. Like, we fully acknowledge that it should stop existing. Like, it doesn't function without income inequality. Like, if we
Mhm.
succeed and get rid of every piece of income inequality, then it goes out of business.
Or just like the poor
Not that that's what we
distribution.
want to do.
Yeah.
Right.
I've been seeing this too, actually. This is really exciting. Like, because fundraising in this space for a long time, like 6 years of blank stares where people are like, no, we do food. That's cash. And like kind of drawing a mental line between the two. I am seeing, like, here in America, a lot of people like opening up to the idea of like, this shit is not working. It's the same thing over and over. We can't serve the whole population. We're falling behind. And more people getting excited about this idea of UBI. We're talking with people about like running one of our pilots for commingle in like a northeastern rural Pennsylvania, where they run food security, food bank type stuff, where they just try to get food to people as much as possible, but they see all the inefficiencies of that, like the shipping and everything, and just like, well, when I say, why don't we just get people cash and let the market bring the food in, and they're like, yeah, absolutely, let's try it out. So I'm really excited to see this rhetoric happening a lot, because we've been living in this world of top-down thinking. My main example is the SDGs, like the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, where there's maybe you can pop up a thing in the edit that shows what the 17 are. But number 1 is end poverty. Like number 2 is like no homelessness, and number 3 is no hunger, and number 4 is whatever. But there's like 17 of these things, and the implication of giving them all like the same sort of coverage on the site is that they're equal sort of goals. But if you end poverty, the other, like most of the other ones, go away entirely, and a lot of them are mitigated very quickly or to a great degree. Like, if you end poverty, there is no hunger, there is no homelessness. Like, it kind of is tied up in it. And to distract ourselves and say,
almost part of the definition.
yeah, we're going to fix all of these things separately and individually. What's your SDG? What do you focus on? It's like, no, dude, let's get money to everybody. And a lot of these things go away. And the goal for all of these like UN think tanks and charities should be to obsolete themselves. Like, they should put themselves out of work.
Yeah, exactly. It's great to see. And I hope that it spreads to, the US food banks too. And I hope that other nonprofits and other sectors follow the example of Miracle Messages in San Francisco and the Denver Basic Income Pilot in Denver, where, let's make sure people get cash. I want more nonprofits to see that they should be trusting those that they aim to help with cash to make their own decisions, instead of getting donors to donate funds to the organization and then making those decisions for people and not trusting them.
And there's still the possibility that there will be plenty of roles for nonprofits to play. But if you give people cash, like universally, then they can have much more specialist roles. Like, okay, people still need counseling for this sort of thing, or people still need help like finding housing or whatever. If like everyone has, or in a situation where you don't have a UBI, like all of these organizations are trying to figure out ways to provide full wraparound services to people in like every form of crisis all at once. And so they're overwhelmed and they can barely help anybody. So yeah, it doesn't mean immediate
they're also competing with each other for money that is available. And like,
there's also
that work there are like, how am I need to eat too,
Yeah, they're competing with each other, and there's also it's like it's so much harder Like there's a larger population of people out there, and there's a significant percentage of that population experiencing issues from poverty and stuff, that it would resolve itself. They could resolve their own problems. They don't need any help if they just got cash. And then so once you pull them out of that population, then the only people left are those that actually need more help than a UBI provides. And then those are the people that nonprofits can focus on. And because there's like a smaller population of people, and we all know that UBI isn't going to solve that problem, then that's like, it's so much easier to help when they have that smaller, more concentrated population.
Which is why the foundation is called It's a Foundation, because it's not just in a person's life, but societally. If you have an entire population that can solve a lot more of their own problems on their own without having to bother or be helped, then all of a sudden all of our other programs that are designed to help people, from rehabilitative to job placement to all of the stuff, like their workload actually shrinks significantly. So not only do we put this in place and solve a bunch of problems directly and immediately for people, but also we can shrink all kinds of other support programs to be much more specialized and just as needed, rather than trying to like take people out of extreme scarcity all at once.
The next thing I wanted to talk about is the results of yet another pilot. It came out recently. This is Tacoma's. Tacoma's pilot gave 110 families $500 a month. It improved employment, savings, and well-being, challenging myths about poverty. Recipients increased full-time work and showed better financial stability. Proving poverty is about lack of cash, not character. This is an article from official hacksandwonks.com. And, it links to the University of Pennsylvania study and gets into that. I'll just read the section that I think a lot of people would be interested in. One of the most persistent myths about guaranteed income that it discourages work was firmly refuted by a study's findings. Full-time employment among recipients actually increased from 57% to 66% 6 months after payments ended. The treatment group maintained higher employment rates, 63% compared to the control group at 52%, and many participants used the funds to pursue better employment opportunities through job training and education. Quote, we even have stories about people who had an opportunity because they could breathe for a moment. They could think about their future, said Tacoma Mayor Victoria Woodards. We had one person who took the opportunity when he went to work to take some courses online and actually get more certificates. The study also challenged stereotypes about poor financial management among low-income families. Recipients demonstrated careful financial planning, with their ability to handle $400 emergency expenses increasing from 14% to 37%. Many invested in education, business equipment, or other assets to improve their earning potential. One recipient, a handyman, used the funds to buy better tools, which led to more jobs and ultimately improved relationships with his children. Beyond the financial impacts, the study revealed significant positive effects on recipients' mental health and family relationships, suggesting that poverty's impact extends far beyond simple monetary shortfalls. Recipients reported deeper levels of hope and improved courage, faith, and self-transcendence. Many participants found themselves able to spend more quality time with their children and reported reduced stress and anxiety levels during the program. So again, this is just 12 months. It was a typical kind of short 1-year program. It was on the smaller side with just, a little over 100 people receiving this, $500 a month. But still, again, you had all these positive impacts from the program that we're so used to seeing.
Yeah, stay where you are for a second. I want that last paragraph. I'm hearing like skepticism from people about, like in my head, certain types of people about hope and improved courage and faith and self-transcendence and like, oh, that's all, sort of like fluffy, feel good, like bullshit sort of stuff. That's the good stuff. Like that's actually some of the stuff I was most floored by like being there with people going through the like basic income for bootstraps, was watching someone turn into a confident, empowered like person in the world who is now doing something that they care about, that they feel like matters, that is fulfilling, that they're there for their family. Like that shit is what we should be striving for our population. And it sounds all nice when it's just words, but when you see it in reality, it's the most beautiful thing to see a person sort of like come into their confidence.
Yeah. When I saw that like self transcendence, that they would even kind of like ask that question or, get at that. Again, that just reminds me of Maslow's hierarchy, where, at the top is self transcendence. So like we make that argument all the time where if you meet people's basic needs, then yeah, it just enables them to meet the higher needs. And the highest needs is self transcendence, where people can actually feel that they're being their best selves. And, to think that people will stop trying to do that if they have a basic income, it's just nonsense. Like, of course, if they're more able to reach for those higher needs, then that's exactly what they aim for.
And it's just a sign of how bad we're fucking up and doing each other, like how much we're shooting ourselves in the foot, that it's like immediately apparent on reading that I need to like make a caveat or talk about it, because people are going to say, well, that's just new agey bullshit. Like, that's how disillusioned we are with what humanity can be and what society can be, that like we know that that's where a lot of heads are going to go.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to like get too far into like a meta-analysis of how studies are done, but like comparing that kind of a study to the Sam Altman one is like you're getting different results from these two studies. Does it feel that the studies are different? Like it's kind of like the qualitative analysis is really the only way to get at like the answer to like, does it improve people's lives or not? Are they better off or aren't they? Right. And like to do it with like that's the only thing I care about personally, but is it you know what I mean? Like, is there anything changing minds here, right? Like, are people just sticking with the attitudes they started with?
There's also I was thinking almost the exact same thing. I have meta study written down on my paper where like we spend all of this time talking about all these different studies in their different contexts, and like, well, they didn't look at this, and it's this population, and it's this area. Like, there have been, 6-figure of people, like over 100,000 people have been parts of UBI pilots or basic income or direct cash pilots, and in multiple countries, and like over like a couple hundred studies. Like, is there like a sort of a meta study that is like, here are the things we can glean across that 150,000 person population? Like, I would be interested in seeing that. Like, is that what that UBI data project wants to do? Or like something that's like all of the American pilots together, here's what it is, not just this little pocket or that pocket. All of the global pilots together, here's what we found, like, coherent sort of way.
Yeah, it wants to make like a kind of a one-stop shop for all these different programs and pilots, results of those. And I would expect like meta-analyses, some summaries of that stuff. There have been some meta-analyses. So there's the one I share a lot, which is about the impact on work, since that's what most people care about. And we've talked about that multiple times, how this systematic review of like a bunch of different studies of programs and stuff found no significant decrease in work, and only in specific groups. And then the overall employment actually went up through other members of the community without jobs, like taking those jobs from when people quit those jobs. So like overall, there's just no significant reduction of work. Then there was another meta-analysis that I've read, which is about, I believe it was either physical health or mental health or both. It found positive stuff there across all these different studies. It all depends on like the details of the study and all that stuff. But yeah, it's a good point that Josh, that you're making, as far as, if people look at like the results of like a 150 person, whatever study that was for 1 year, clearly you can say, well, this 3-year study of 1,000 people is better. But also maybe that study didn't look at the same kind of things. Maybe they asked different questions. Those are important. And then of course, diving into like deep into the findings and, beyond like the headlines, as we've discussed before, where, if the open research pilot found that on average, there was no increase in self-employment, then people can think, oh, like basic income didn't increase self-employment. But then if you look at, what about the Black participants and female participants, and find that, there was actually a significant increase in those, with like 26% increase for Black participants and a 15% increase for women, then clearly there is an impact that it's notable, and we can see that as a success for those
Right.
groups.
And
We shouldn't ignore
replicable,
that.
they've done enough different pilots that I would really love when everyone's picking and choosing what pilot they want to point to or whatever to make a point, to have like a comprehensive, cohesive, like meta-analysis place that shows like, actually this is across, hundreds of thousands of people. This is like that same demographic you're talking about across like 20 different pilots. This is like, just kind of gives a place to share with people, rather than having to like each time being like, but in Finland, but in Namibia, and in Jackson, Mississippi, this is what we found, because that's an endless conversation, and it's always like, but look over here, it's a distraction sort of thing that you're never going to answer the question fully.
Yeah, but the thing I like about the local pilots is that you can almost read between the lines of some of the reports, where you can see like, we just want to give money to people because they need it, right? You could tell the people running the program are like, there's this money, we want to give it to people, and it's making their lives better. Now, what form do we have to fill out to prove to you that this is a good idea? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I do find it positive. I'm also going to suggest people join Bluesky at this point. Like, I've been really impressed. I think there's definitely been like a switch post-election, with like so much more activity on Bluesky, so much like massive growth in a quick amount of time, and also like so much like less activity on Twitter/X. And one of the things I think is really promising that I've seen on Bluesky too is that I'm just seeing all kinds of comments about basic income that are just in other conversations. It's not replies to me. Again, I look up every day about what people are saying about basic income, and it's just very positive. And I would say on Bluesky, like, I feel like kind of the consensus, let's say, if there is one, is that, of course, this is another success. Like, we're just seeing success after success after success. We know this works. We're just not doing it. And like, that's promising to me, where like there is this kind of this reaction to all these pilots results, is just like, it's just been like, it's like been beaten like a dead horse as far as just how successful these are, and yet we just do another pilot and another pilot and another pilot. Why don't we?
I am starting to see more influencers like starting to step into it too, just like social media profiles, and like people who never really were before, giving it that much just time in their thought process, or in their what they post about. Like, it just wasn't like worth it for their calculation of likes and followers and stuff. But now they're doing big posts about either including it or making it totally about it. Like, people are, I think, desperately looking for something new in a lot of ways. And all of the building, like the UBI movement and the idea has done, I think it's coming into its actual moment now, especially given the political landscape and how everyone's fed up with nothing working. That's why we see it happening in food security, and that's why we see it happening in politics and in, just conversations in general.
Do we have a universal basic income sentiment analyzer? Because basically what you're doing is, there are tools for being able to like just do a search on across all social media, and it can analyze like, are people feeling good? Are people feeling bad?
I've seen some studies
like
done
a
about
finger
that
on a pulse,
before.
and then you could just be measuring a pulse. Like,
I mean, that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, I've seen a study like
I don't
that
know too much about them, but
from years ago. But it would be cool to see a newer one. Also, like, basically Elon kind of removed that ability on Twitter by
it's like
making the API super expensive.
Things.
Right. But then Blue Sky has, it's just like an open source feed. So, people actually can, like, anyone can actually look up everything. That's just like the constant stream of feed of everything on Blue Sky. People are already like utilizing that data. That's certainly something out there that someone could do, is actually, do a sentiment analysis on Blue Sky for something like that. It'd be interesting to see.
We'll get that up and running. Next.
Oh yeah, I'm the UBI guy if people are like moving to Blue Sky, just like I am on Twitter. Scott's got enough followers. Follow me too.
Yeah, one of the cool things too about Blue Sky is the starter pack. I appreciate how like I was able to add that to my page, and like anyone who follows me is able to like see I have a starter pack, and they're actually able to follow everyone I recommend following all in this one click of a button.
I don't think
really
they
cool.
haven't done like the full like export of all of your Twitter posts and import it into Blue Sky, from what I can tell, unless somebody's working on that.
I think there's third-party solutions to kind of. I haven't messed with the import stuff, but I've seen some people do imports. I've just been doing like direct copy and pasting of some stuff, and I do intend to go through my, 108 point.
I know, like you've got like a lifetime's worth of posts in there.
I got so much gold that didn't get its full due on Twitter. Maybe I'll give it another shot. L in the comments says, "Great time for UBI to come in a big way when the old system is falling apart." Yeah, it's too bad we had to wait this long. But if that is true, then it's good to be ready. Like I don't ever buy the inevitability argument. Like it'll happen because it's like, no, it'll happen because people are pushing and fighting for it. And then when we come to a decision and crisis point, it's there for us to select. So we gotta keep pushing, but it also does feel like people are ready for it. So I'm glad that we've been pushing.
And that is a good note to end on, a nice positive note. Thank you all for joining us today. And, for those who are watching it live, or for those who would want to watch it live in the future, we try to do these every 2 weeks on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern. For watching this on YouTube, please, like and subscribe, add a reply, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.